The war had lasted for 97 years. Princess Valthara stood alone in her chambers, looking out at the stars through the massive window. Her silver skin reflected the dim light of distant suns. Her purple eyes held no tears, though her heart felt heavy like stone. The Sindari Empire had fought the Galactic Coalition for nearly a century. Millions had died. Entire planets had burned. And now, after all that death and destruction, the war was ending. Not with victory, not with defeat, but with a marriage, her marriage. The Council had decided 3 days ago. The humans, those strange creatures from a small blue planet called Earth, had offered to broker a peace agreement. They were new to the galactic stage, having only discovered faster than light travel 50 years ago. They were weak. They were fragile. They lived such short lives that most species barely noticed them. But somehow, they had convinced both sides to stop fighting. The price was simple: a union between the Sindari royal bloodline and a human representative. A symbol of peace. A promise of cooperation. Valthara was that symbol. She heard the door open behind her. Her father, Emperor Kefvarin, walked in slowly. He was old now, older than any Sindari emperor before him. The war had aged him. His once bright silver skin had turned dull gray. His eyes, once sharp and commanding, now looked tired. "It is time," he said softly. Valthara did not turn around. "I know. You do not have to do this," her father said. "We can find another way. We can continue fighting." We cannot," Valthara interrupted. "You know this as well as I do. Our fleets are broken. Our colonies are starving. If we continue this war, we will destroy ourselves." She finally turned to face him. "I will do my duty, father, as you taught me." The emperor looked at his daughter for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "The human has arrived. He waits in the ceremonial hall." Valthara took a deep breath. "Then let us not keep him waiting." She walked through the palace corridors she had known since childhood. Servants bowed as she passed. Guards stood at attention. Everyone knew what was happening today. Everyone knew what she was sacrificing. The ceremonial hall was vast. Tall pillars of white stone reached up toward a ceiling painted with the history of the Sindari people. Thousands of years of conquest and glory. And now, a human stood at the center of it all. Valthara stopped walking when she saw him. He was tall for a human. That was the first thing she noticed. Most humans she had seen in reports and images were small, barely reaching her chest. But this one stood almost as tall as her. He had dark hair, cut short and neat. His skin was brown, darker than most humans she had seen. His eyes were also brown, warm and soft like the mud of riverbanks. He wore a simple black uniform with no decorations. No medals, no symbols of rank. Just plain black fabric that made him look more like a servant than a diplomat. He was not handsome by Sindari standards. His features were too soft. His body was too thick. He looked heavy and slow, like a creature built for carrying loads rather than fighting wars. But when his eyes met hers, something strange happened. He smiled. It was not a nervous smile. It was not a political smile. It was simply a smile, open and honest and completely without fear. "Princess Valthara," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected. "My name is Daniel Carter. I know this is not what either of us wanted, but I promise you, I will do everything I can to make this work." Valthara did not know how to respond. She had expected arrogance. She had expected fear. She had expected anything except this calm, gentle greeting. "You speak Sindari," she said finally. "I have been learning for 3 months," Daniel replied. "I am not very good yet, but I am trying." 3 months. Most species took years to learn the Sindari language. Its complex tones and subtle meanings made it one of the hardest languages in the galaxy. And this human had learned enough to have a conversation in 3 months. She did not know whether to be impressed or suspicious. The ceremony was brief. A priest spoke the ancient words. Daniel repeated them in broken but understandable Sindari. Velthara spoke her vows without emotion, her voice flat and distant. When it was done, they were married. The reception was filled with diplomats and nobles from a dozen different species. They all watched the new couple with curious eyes. Some looked at Daniel with contempt. Others looked at him with pity. A few looked at him with something like fear. Velthara understood the contempt and the pity. But she did not understand the fear. Humans were weak. Everyone knew this. They broke easily. They died easily. They needed constant care just to survive. They could not breathe in most atmospheres. They could not handle extreme temperatures. They needed to sleep every single night, wasting merely a third of their short lives unconscious. What was there to fear? Daniel stood beside her throughout the reception. He did not try to touch her. He did not try to talk to her unless someone else addressed them both. He simply stood there, calm and patient, like a rock in a river dot. When the reception finally ended, they were escorted to their shared quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel. It was a large room designed for comfort. 2 separate sleeping areas. A shared living space. Everything a married couple might need without requiring them to actually be together. Daniel looked around the room slowly. Then he turned to face her. "I know you did not choose this," he said. "Neither did I. But here we are." Velthara said nothing. "I do not expect you to love me," Daniel continued. "I do not even expect you to like me. But I want you to know that I will spend every day trying to be worthy of your trust. I will learn your customs. I will respect your traditions. I will never ask you to be something you are not." He paused, and his eyes met hers again with that same calm warmth. "All I ask is that you give me a chance. That is all." Velthara studied him for a long moment. This strange, soft creature from a distant world. This human who spoke her language poorly, but tried anyway. This man who asked for nothing but a chance. She did not trust him. She did not want him. She did not believe this marriage would bring the peace everyone hoped for. But something in his voice made her pause. "We shall see," she said finally. It was not acceptance. It was not rejection. It was simply the truth. Daniel nodded slowly. "That is all I can ask." He turned and walked to his sleeping area without another word. Within minutes, she heard his breathing slow as he fell asleep. Velthara stood by the window and watched the stars. She thought about the war. She thought about the peace. She thought about the strange human sleeping peacefully in the next room. She did not know what the future would bring. But for the first time in 97 years, the guns were silent. Perhaps that was enough. For now. 3 months passed. Velthara had expected the human to be a burden. She had expected him to complain about the food, the temperature, the gravity. She had expected him to struggle with the simplest tasks. She had expected him to be useless. She was wrong. Daniel Carter woke before her every morning. She did not understand how this was possible. Humans needed more sleep than Sindari. They required 8 hours of rest every night just to function. And yet, every morning when she opened her eyes, Daniel was already awake. He would be reading reports, learning new words, studying the maps of Sindari space. "How do you wake so early?" she asked him one morning. Daniel looked up from his reading and smiled. "I set an alarm in my head. Humans can do that. We can train ourselves to wake at specific times." "An alarm in your head?" "It is hard to explain. We just decide to wake up. And then we do." Velthara did not understand. But she was beginning to realize that there was much about humans, She did not understand that his language skills improved faster than anyone expected. By the end of the first month, he could hold full conversations in Sindari. By the end of the second month, he was reading ancient texts. By the end of the third month, some people forgot he was not a native speaker. How did you learn so fast? The palace linguist asked him one day. The old scholar had been teaching languages for 200 years. He had never seen anyone learn like this. Daniel shrugged. I practiced every day, every spare moment. I made mistakes, and I learned from them. That is how humans learn. We fail and fail and fail until we succeed. The linguist looked troubled by this answer. But Valthara, who had been listening from the doorway, felt something strange stir in her chest. Something like respect. The fourth month brought their first official duty together. A state visit to the frontier colony of Vareth 7. It was a mining world, rich in the rare metals that powered Sindari technology. The colony had been damaged during the war and was still being rebuilt. They traveled aboard a diplomatic cruiser with a full delegation of Sindari officials. Daniel spent most of the journey asking questions. About the colony. About the miners. About the reconstruction efforts. He took notes on everything. Why do you care so much? Valthara asked him one evening. Daniel looked up from his notes. Because these are your people. And you are my wife. Their problems are my problems now. She did not know how to respond to that. Varath-7 was not beautiful. The sky was brown with dust. The buildings were simple and functional. The people were tired and worn from years of war and hard labor. But they greeted the princess with genuine warmth. She was one of them. She had fought for them. She had sacrificed for them. They looked at Daniel with suspicion. But he did not seem to mind. The inspection of the mining facilities went smoothly. Daniel asked intelligent questions that surprised the colony administrators. He understood more about mining operations than anyone expected. When Valthara asked him about it later, he explained that he had grown up in a mining town on Earth. His father had been a miner. His grandfather had been a miner. He knew the work. It was on the second day of the visit that everything changed. The delegation was touring a newly constructed housing complex when the ground began to shake. The building groaned. Cracks appeared in the walls. People started screaming. Earthquake, someone shouted. Underground collapse. The old mines are giving way. The building shook again, harder this time. And then, with a terrible sound, the ceiling came down. Valthara was thrown to the ground. Dust filled her eyes and lungs. She heard screaming all around her. When she finally managed to stand, she saw the disaster. A massive section of the ceiling had collapsed. Huge beams of durasteel, each weighing hundreds of kilograms, had fallen across the main hall. And beneath those beams, trapped and crying for help, were 3 Sindari officials. The rescue teams were called immediately, but they were on the other side of the colony. It would take hours for them to arrive with the proper equipment. We have to help them, Valthara said. She moved toward the debris, but guards held her back. Your Highness, the structure is unstable. We cannot risk. They will die before the rescue teams arrive. We have to do something now. The guards and surviving officials gathered around the debris. They tried to lift the beams. 5 of them together, straining with all their strength. The beam moved a few centimeters and then stopped. It was too heavy. We need more people, someone said. There is no time. Valthara felt helpless. She watched her people trapped beneath the rubble, slowly being crushed, and she could do nothing. Then she saw Daniel. He walked toward the debris slowly. He removed his formal jacket and folded it neatly. He rolled up his sleeves. His arms were thick with muscle, more than she had noticed before. What are you doing? She demanded. He did not answer. He simply walked to the largest beam, the one that was crushing the trapped officials, and he gripped it with both hands, and he lifted Don. The beam rose. Slowly at first. Then higher. Daniel's face turned red. The veins in his neck bulged. His entire body shook with the effort. But the beam rose. "Get them out," he said through gritted teeth. Now, the guards moved quickly. They pulled the trapped officials from beneath the debris one by one. Daniel held the beam the entire time. 30 seconds. A minute. 2 minutes. When the last official was free, Daniel let the beam drop. The crash shook the building. He stood there breathing hard. Sweat poured down his face. His hands were red and raw. But he was smiling. "Is everyone safe?" he asked. Velthara stared at him. She could not speak. She had just watched a human lift a beam that 5 Sindari could not move together. She had watched him hold it for over 2 minutes without stopping. This was impossible. Humans were weak. Everyone knew this, but Daniel Carter was not weak. The colony physician insisted on examining Daniel after the rescue. Velthara came with him, still trying to understand what she had seen. The examination revealed the damage. Daniel's hands were torn and bleeding. Several small bones in his fingers were cracked. His right shoulder was dislocated, pulled from its socket by the incredible strain. "How did you continue lifting with a dislocated shoulder?" the physician asked. She was Sindari, and she had treated many species in her career. But she had never seen anything like this. Daniel winced as she reset his shoulder. He did not cry out. He did not even close his eyes. He just looked at her calmly and said, "It needed to be done. So I did it. But the pain, yes, it hurt. It still hurts." He flexed his damaged hand slowly. But pain is just information. It tells you something is wrong. It does not have to stop you from acting. The physician looked at Velthara with wide eyes. Neither of them had words. Later that night, Velthara found Daniel on the observation deck of their ship. He stood alone, looking out at the stars. His hands were bandaged. His arm was in a sling. But he stood straight and tall. "You should be resting," she said. "I could not sleep." She walked to stand beside him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. "I thought humans were weak," she said finally. "Everyone says this. Humans are fragile. Humans break easily. Humans cannot survive without constant care." Daniel turned to look at her. His brown eyes were calm and patient. "We are fragile," he admitted. "Our bones break. Our bodies fail. We live such short lives compared to most species." He paused. "But we do not let that stop us. We have never let that stop us." "How?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Humans evolved on a world that tried to kill us. The weather, the animals, the diseases, even each other. Everything on Earth was dangerous. And we had no natural weapons. No claws, no armor, no venom, just our minds and our stubbornness." He held up his bandaged hands. "So we learned to endure. We learned to push through pain. We learned that giving up meant death." He smiled slightly. "Some people call us the persistent species, because we never stop. No matter how much it hurts, no matter how impossible it seems, we just keep going until we succeed or we die." Velthara looked at her husband, this strange, soft creature who had lifted a being that should have crushed him. This human who spoke of pain like it was merely an inconvenience. She had underestimated him. She had underestimated all of them. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for saving my people." Daniel nodded. "They are my people now too." And for the first time since their wedding, Velthara believed him. 6 months into the marriage, someone tried to kill them. The peace treaty had brought hope to most of the Sindari Empire. But not everyone wanted peace. Some had lost too much in the war. Some had built their power on the conflict. Some simply hated humans and could not accept one in the royal family. The group called themselves the True Sindari. They believed that the marriage was a betrayal of everything their people stood for. They believed that Princess Velthara had sold her honor for a fragile peace that would not last. They believed that Daniel Carter had to die. The attack came on Cathmora. Cathmora was a jungle moon, covered in thick forests and poisonous swamps. The Sindari royal family owned a small retreat there, a place to escape the pressures of the palace. Velthara had suggested the visit. She thought it might help Daniel understand her people better. She thought they might finally start to build something real between them. She never expected it to become a death trap. The convoy was attacked 3 hours after landing. Energy weapons tore through the escort vehicles. Soldiers fell before they could even raise their weapons. The attackers were fast, organized, and ruthless. Velthara felt the blast before she saw it. A burning heat across her side, and then she was on the ground. Blood, silver like all Sindari blood, poured from a wound in her ribs. The pain was terrible. Velthara. Daniel was beside her instantly. His hands pressed against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp and focused. "The guards," she gasped. "Dead. All of them." Daniel looked around quickly. Through the smoke and fire, she could see shapes moving. The attackers. At least a dozen of them. "You have to run," she said. "Leave me. Save yourself." Daniel looked at her with an expression she had never seen before. It was not fear. It was not anger. It was something harder. Something colder. "No," he said simply. He lifted her from the ground. She cried out in pain, but he did not stop. He placed her over his shoulder and started running into the jungle. Behind them, she heard shouting. The attackers had seen them. The hunt had begun. Daniel ran for hours. The jungle of Cathmora was not kind to outsiders. The air was thick with moisture and strange spores. The plants dripped with acids that burned exposed skin. The ground was soft and treacherous, filled with hidden pools that could swallow a person whole. And everywhere, there were predators. Creatures with too many teeth and too many eyes. Things that hunted by sound and smell and heat. The jungle was alive, and it was hungry. Daniel kept running. Velthara drifted in and out of consciousness. Every time she woke, she expected to find herself dead. But every time, Daniel was still there. Still carrying her. Still moving forward. "Put me down," she whispered. "You cannot carry me forever." "Watch me," Daniel replied. His voice was rough with exhaustion, but his steps never slowed. "This is foolish. You will die for nothing." Daniel stopped for just a moment. He looked at her with those warm brown eyes, now hard as stone. "You are not nothing," he said. "You are my wife, and I do not leave my people behind." He started running again. Night fell on Cathmora. The jungle became even more dangerous in the darkness. Things moved in the shadows. Things that did not fear the light. Daniel found a small cave in a rocky hillside and carried her inside. He set her down gently and examined her wound. It was bad. The blast had damaged deep tissue. Sindari healed fast, but this would take days. Days she did not have. "The attackers," she said. "They are still following." "I know." Daniel was gathering materials from his pack. Medical supplies, bandages, a small knife. "How many?" 12 when we started. I counted them at the convoy. 12 trained killers against 1 wounded princess and 1 human. The odds were impossible. "You should go," Velthara said. "Find help. Bring back soldiers." Daniel looked at her. Then he smiled, just slightly. "And leave you alone?" "No. We stay together. You will die. Maybe." He finished bandaging her wound and sat back. "But if I run, you will definitely die." I would rather take the maybe. Valthara did not understand this human. She did not understand how he could face death so calmly. She did not understand why he would throw his life away for someone who had barely spoken to him for 6 months. Why? She asked. Why do you care? This marriage was political. I have given you nothing. I have barely even been kind to you. Daniel was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was soft. When I was young, my mother was very sick. Cancer. It is a disease that humans get. The doctors said she would die. Everyone said there was nothing we could do. He paused, looking at the cave wall as if seeing something far away. My father refused to accept it. He worked 3 jobs to pay for treatment. He sat by her bed every night. He never gave up, never stopped fighting. And when the doctor said she had 6 months to live, he made those 6 months into 6 years. Daniel looked at Valthara. He taught me that you do not give up on the people you care about. Ever. No matter how hopeless it seems. You fight until you cannot fight anymore. And then you find a way to keep fighting. But you do not care about me, Valthara said. You barely know me. I know enough. Daniel checked his weapon, a small energy pistol he had taken from a fallen guard. I know you are brave. I know you sacrificed your happiness for your people. I know you stayed awake all night reading reports about the colony workers on Vareth 7 because you were worried about them. He looked at her with something like warmth. I know you are worth saving. That is enough for me. The attackers found them on the second night. Daniel heard them coming long before they arrived. He had positioned himself at the cave entrance, hidden in the shadows. The pistol was in his hand. The knife was strapped to his leg. Stay quiet, he whispered to Valthara. No matter what happens. The first attacker came through the entrance fast and confident. He expected to find wounded prey. He found Daniel's knife in his throat instead. The second attacker followed close behind. Daniel took the first, one's weapon, and shot him twice in the chest. Then the others came. What happened next would haunt Valthara for the rest of her life. Daniel fought like nothing she had ever seen. He was not graceful like a Sindari warrior. He was not precise like a trained soldier. He was brutal, savage, terrifying. A blade went through his leg. He did not stop. He killed the attacker and kept fighting. Energy burns covered his back. He did not stop. He turned and shot 2 more. One of them hit him in the shoulder. The same shoulder that had been dislocated months ago. He did not stop. He grabbed the attacker with his damaged arm and broke his neck. 7 bodies lay in the cave entrance. Daniel stood among them, covered in blood both silver and red. His breath came in harsh gasps. His body was broken in a dozen places, but he was still standing. The remaining 5 attackers looked at him from outside the cave. Valthara could see their faces in the moonlight. She expected anger. She expected determination. She saw fear. They retreated into the jungle. Daniel watched them go without moving. Only when the sounds of their escape had faded did he finally allow himself to fall. Daniel. Valthara crawled toward him, ignoring the fire in her side. Daniel, stay with me. He was still breathing. Barely. Blood poured from wounds that should have killed him. His eyes were unfocused, but they found her face. Are you safe? He whispered. Yes, I am safe. Because of you. He smiled, just barely. Good, that is good. Valthara pressed her hands against his worst wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. Tears she did not know she had fell down her silver cheeks. Do not die, she said. Please. Do not die. Daniel reached up with a trembling hand and touched her face. Not planning to, he said. Still have things to do. Still have to earn your trust. She took his hand and held it tight. You already have, she whispered. You already have. The rescue team found them 3 days later. Daniel was unconscious but alive. The medics said it was impossible. The wounds he had suffered should have killed him many times over. No species could survive that much damage. But Daniel was not any species. He was human. And humans, Velthara was learning, did not know how to give up. 1 year after the wedding, the peace shattered. The Verkith Dominion came. Without warning, they were an ancient empire from the outer rim of the galaxy. For thousands of years, they had conquered and consumed every civilization in their path. They did not negotiate. They did not trade. They simply took what they wanted and destroyed what they did not need. No one knew why they had finally turned their eyes towards Sindari space. Perhaps they had simply run out of easier targets. Perhaps they saw the recent war as a sign of weakness. Perhaps they were simply hungry for new worlds to devour. The reason did not matter. What mattered was that they were here. The first attack destroyed 3 border colonies in a single day. The Sindari fleet responded quickly, gathering their remaining warships for a decisive battle. They were confident. The Sindari were ancient warriors. They had never lost a war. The battle lasted 4 hours. The Sindari fleet was destroyed. Velthara stood in the War Council chamber and listened to the reports. Colony after colony was falling. The Verkith moved like a storm across the stars, unstoppable and merciless. Their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their numbers overwhelming. Her father, the Emperor, sat on his throne with his head bowed. He looked older than she had ever seen him. The weight of defeat pressed down on his shoulders like a physical force. "We must consider surrender," one of the admirals said. His voice was hollow. "If we offer tribute, if we give them what they want, perhaps they will spare our cool worlds. You would have us become slaves?" Another admiral demanded. "Better to die fighting than to live on our knees. Better to live than to die for pride." The argument continued, but Velthara was not listening. She was watching Daniel. He sat in the corner of the chamber, quiet and still. He had been allowed to attend as her husband, but everyone knew his presence was purely symbolic. What could a human possibly contribute to military strategy? But Velthara knew better now. She had seen what this human could do. "Daniel," she said quietly. The room fell silent. "You have thoughts. I can see it in your face. Speak." The admirals looked shocked. A human speaking in the War Council? It was unthinkable. But the Emperor raised his hand before they could object. "Let him speak," Kethforin said. "We are drowning. Perhaps a fresh perspective will help." Daniel stood slowly. He looked at each of the admirals in turn, then at the holographic map showing the Verkith advance. "With respect, Your Majesty," he said in perfect Sindari, "you are thinking about this wrong." Silence. Absolute silence. "The Verkith expect a conventional war," Daniel continued. "They expect you to meet them in open battle, fleet against fleet. That is how they have won every war for thousands of years. They are bigger and stronger, so they crush their enemies with direct force." He walked to the holographic map and pointed at the Verkith supply lines. "But that is not the only way to fight a war." Admiral Rathan, the eldest and most respected military leader in the room, stepped forward. "What are you suggesting, human?" "Guerrilla warfare," Daniel said. "Sabotage. Psychological operations. Hit and run tactics. Instead of meeting them in battle, you make the war so painful and expensive that they decide you are not worth conquering." The admirals looked at each other with confusion and disgust. "You want us to fight without honor," Verthan said. "To attack from shadows like cowards." Daniel's eyes met the admirals without flinching. "I want you to win. Honor is a luxury for peacetime. Right now, your people are dying. Your worlds are burning. Your children are being sold into slavery. Is your honor worth all of that? The room was silent. Humans have fought many wars, Daniel continued. We have been outgunned and outmatched more times than I can count. But we learned something important along the way. A smaller force can defeat a larger one if they fight smart. If they refuse to play by the enemy's rules. He turned back to the map. The Verkith supply lines are long and vulnerable. One ship carrying fuel supplies an entire invasion fleet. Destroy that ship and the fleet is stranded. Attack their communication relays and their commanders cannot coordinate. Assassinate their leaders and their soldiers lose direction. He looked at the Emperor. You do not need to defeat them in battle. You need to make them bleed until they decide you are too much trouble to conquer. The Emperor was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, Can you lead such a campaign? Father, Admiral Verthan interrupted. You cannot be serious. A human leading Sindari soldiers? It is absurd. I will not lead alone, Daniel said. I will teach. I will advise. But your people will fight. Your soldiers, trained in these new tactics. He paused. I will also fight alongside them. Every battle. Every mission. I will not ask them to do anything I would not do myself. Velthara stepped forward. I trust him, Father. I have seen what he can do. I have seen what humans can survive. If anyone can teach us to fight this way, it is him. The Emperor looked at his daughter. He looked at Daniel. He looked at the map showing his empire slowly being devoured. Do it, he said. You have 3 months to prove this works. If you fail, we surrender and pray for mercy. Daniel nodded. 3 months. I will make them count. The first strike team was assembled within a week. Daniel selected 50 volunteers, young Sindari soldiers who were willing to learn new ways of fighting. Many of the older officers thought they were fools. Some thought they were traitors. But they came anyway. Daniel also brought 20 humans, soldiers and specialists from Earth who had volunteered for the mission. They were not many, but they understood what Daniel was trying to do. They had grown up with stories of guerrilla wars and impossible victories. The training was brutal. Daniel pushed them harder than they had ever been pushed. He taught them to move silently, to attack quickly, to disappear before the enemy could respond. He taught them to think like hunters instead of soldiers. Some of the Sindari struggled. They were trained for honorable combat, face to face with their enemies. This sneaking and hiding felt wrong. It feels wrong because you are thinking about yourself, Daniel told them. Stop thinking about your honor. Think about the children on the colonies that have not been invaded yet. Think about your families, your friends, the people who will die if you fail. He paused. You can have your honor back after you win. Right now, I need warriors who want to survive. The first mission was a fuel depot deep in Verkith-controlled space. It supplied 5 invasion fleets. If it was destroyed, those fleets would be stranded for weeks. The garrison had 300 soldiers. Daniel's team had 12. They struck at night, moving through the station like ghosts. The humans led the way, showing the Sindari how to move in the shadows. They planted explosives at critical points. They cut communication lines. They killed guards silently, one by one. When the explosives detonated, the entire depot went up in flames. The Verkith scrambled to respond, but by then, Daniel's team was already gone. They lost 2 soldiers. The Verkith lost 300 and enough fuel to strand 5 fleets for a month. Word spread through the Sindari military. The humans' tactics worked. More volunteers came. More missions launched. Fuel depots, communication relays, command ships. Nothing was safe from the shadow fighters. The Verkith grew frustrated. They could not catch an enemy that refused to stand and fight. Every time they thought they had trapped the resistance, the fighters simply disappeared. And then, a week later, another depot would burn. Another commander would die in his sleep. Daniel was wounded on nearly every mission. Burns, cuts, broken bones. The medic said he should rest. He refused. "I will rest when the war is over," he said. Velthara watched her husband become something more than a man. He became a symbol, a legend, the human who would not die, the ghost who led soldiers through impossible missions and brought them home alive. The Sundari. Soldiers started calling him something in their ancient language, a word that had not been used in centuries, Kethver, the unkillable one. And the Verkith learned to fear that name. By the end of the third month, the invasion had stalled. The Verkith had not taken a new colony in 6 weeks. Their supply lines were in chaos. Their commanders were terrified to sleep. The Emperor called Daniel back to the palace. "You have done what you promised," Kethvorin said. "The enemy is bleeding, but they are not defeated. They could still overwhelm us with numbers." "They could," Daniel agreed. "But they will not. How can you be so certain?" Daniel smiled, though it did not reach his eyes. "Because they are afraid now. And afraid enemies make mistakes. Give me 6 more months, and they will be begging for peace." The Emperor looked at this human who had saved his empire. This fragile creature from a small blue world who had done what the greatest Sundari admirals could not. "You have your 6 months," he said. "And my gratitude, though I do not know how to repay such a debt." Daniel bowed his head. "Your Majesty, I did not do this for payment. I did it for my wife, for her people, for the family I never expected to have." They looked at Velthara, standing beside her father's throne. "That is all the payment I need." 2 years after the wedding, the war ended. The Verkith Dominion, conquerors of 1,000 worlds, sent a message requesting peace. Not demanding, not threatening, requesting. The word spread through the galaxy like fire. The unstoppable empire had stopped. Velthara stood in the grand hall of a neutral station, watching the Verkith ambassador approach the signing table. He was tall and broad, with 4 arms and skin like gray stone. His 4 eyes kept moving to one person in the Sundari delegation, Daniel Carter. The human stood beside Velthara, dressed in simple black as he had been on their wedding day. But nothing else about him was the same. His face carried new scars. His left hand was missing 2 fingers. His hair, once dark brown, was now streaked with gray. He stood slightly bent, favoring the leg that had been stabbed on Kethmora. The war had taken much from him, but it had not broken him. Nothing could break him. The ambassador signed the treaty with trembling hands. When he finished, he looked at Daniel with something Velthara had never seen in a Verkith before: fear. "The humans," the ambassador said quietly. "We did not know. We did not understand what you were." Daniel said nothing. "In 10,000 years, we have conquered every species we have encountered. We thought we knew strength. We thought we knew war." The ambassador's 4 eyes blinked slowly. "We were wrong." He turned and walked away without another word. The other Verkith followed him, and none of them looked back. The celebration lasted for days. The Sundari Empire had survived. More than survived. They had won. Songs were written about the shadow fighters. Stories were told about impossible victories. And always, at the center of every story, was the human who had made it possible. KETH VOR, the unkillable one. But Daniel did not celebrate. He spent most of his time in the medical bay, visiting the wounded soldiers who had fought under his command. He knew every name, every face, every story. Velthara found him there on the 3rd day of celebration. "You should be resting," she said, sitting beside him. "I could say the same to you." She smiled. It was strange how easy smiling had become around him. 2 years ago, she had barely been able to look at him. Now she could not imagine a day without seeing his face. "Walk with me," she said. They walked through the station together, past celebrating soldiers and joyful civilians. People bowed to them as they passed. Some reached out just to touch Daniel's arm, as if hoping some of his strength might transfer to them. They found a quiet observation deck overlooking the stars. The same stars that had once been filled with war and death now seemed peaceful, beautiful. "I want to ask you something," Valthara said. "Ask. Why did you agree to this marriage? You could have refused. You had no obligation to the Sindari. We were strangers to you. Our war was not your war." Daniel was quiet for a long moment. He looked out at the stars with eyes that had seen too much. "When I was a boy," he said finally, "I used to read stories. Old stories from Earth. Stories about knights who protected the weak. Heroes who stood against impossible odds. Ordinary people who did extraordinary things because it was right." He turned to look at her. "I always wanted to be someone like that. Someone who mattered. Someone who made the world better instead of worse. But I grew up and became a pilot. I flew cargo ships between planets. I was nobody special. Just another human trying to survive." He paused. "When they asked for volunteers for the peace mission, I thought maybe this was my chance. My chance to be something more. To build something instead of destroy it." He smiled slightly. "I did not know what I was getting into. I did not know about the assassination attempts or the wars or any of it. I just knew that someone needed to try. And I thought, why not me?" Valthara reached out and took his hand. His damaged hand with its missing fingers and scars. She held it gently, like something precious. "I married you expecting nothing," she said. "A political tool. A fragile creature I would outlive by centuries. I was prepared to tolerate you at best." Daniel's smile faded slightly. "Instead," Valthara continued, "I found the strongest being I've ever known." Daniel shook his head. "I am not strong. I have been beaten and broken more times than I can count. I have cried in the darkness when no one could see. I have been so afraid I could barely breathe. That is exactly why you are strong." Valthara stepped closer to him. "Strength is not the absence of fear. It is not being unbreakable. Strength is being afraid and fighting anyway. Being broken and getting back up. Crying in the darkness and still facing the light when morning comes." She placed her free hand over his heart. "Your muscles are impressive. Your endurance is remarkable. Your tolerance for pain is beyond anything I have seen. But that is not what makes you strong." She looked into his brown eyes. "Your heart is what makes you strong. Your stubborn, impossible, beautiful heart that refuses to give up on anyone. That refuses to leave anyone behind. That keeps fighting even when there is no hope left." Daniel's eyes were wet. In 2 years, through all the pain and fear and war, Valthara had never seen him cry. But now, tears rolled down his scarred face. "I told you I would spend every day trying to earn your trust," he whispered. "You succeeded," she whispered back. "You succeeded long ago. I was simply too blind to see it." She leaned forward and pressed her forehead to his. In the Sindari culture, it was the most intimate gesture of love. More meaningful than any kiss. More binding than any vow. "I love you, Daniel Carter. Not because you saved my life. Not because you saved my people. I love you because you showed me what strength really means. Because you taught me that the shortest-lived species in the galaxy can have the biggest heart." Daniel pulled her close. His arms, scarred and damaged and stronger than any arms she had known, wrapped around her. "I love you too," he said. "I have loved you since Kethmara. Since you held my hand in that cave and told me not to die. Since you looked at me like I was worth something." They stood there together, two beings from different worlds. holding each other as the stars turned slowly around them. The years that followed were kind. Daniel lived for another 47 years. A long life for a human. He spent every day of it with Valthara. They traveled together, worked together, built something beautiful together. He never stopped being Kethfor to the Sindari people. Statues were built in his honor. Children were named after him. His tactics became standard training for military forces across the galaxy. But to Valthara, he was simply Daniel. Her husband, her love. Her heart died when he died, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 83. Valthara was holding his hand. His last words were what she expected. "Thank you," he whispered, "for giving me a chance." She held his hand long after it went cold. Valthara lived for another 800 years. She served as empress after her father's death. She guided her people through centuries of peace and prosperity. She watched the alliance between the Sindari and humanity grow into the strongest partnership the galaxy had ever seen. She never remarried. Every year, on the anniversary of their wedding, she would visit the memorial that had been built for Daniel. A simple stone in a garden, surrounded by flowers from Earth and Sindar alike. She would stand before it and speak to him. Tell him about the year that had passed. The children who had been born. The discoveries that had been made. The world he had helped create. And every year, she would end with the same words. "You were the strongest being I ever knew. And I was blessed to love you." The stars continued to turn. Empires rose and fell. Species were born and died. But the story of Daniel Carter lived on. The human who married an alien princess for peace. The fragile creature who became unkillable. The ordinary man who showed the galaxy that true strength was not about muscles or weapons or power. True strength was about love. And love, like humans themselves, never knew when to give up.